for joining us for Montgomery Celebrates Juneteenth. I am Montgomery Township Mayor Sadaf Jaffer, and this event has been organized under the auspices of Montgomery Township's One Montgomery Committee and its Montgomery Mosaic Initiative. Our goal is to combat prejudice and bring this community together. At our last event, Montgomery Speaks Out Against Racism, many participants noted the importance of making Black history a central part of all of our understanding of what it means to be American. Today is a special day. Juneteenth, short for June 19th, is a holiday meant to commemorate the emancipation of those who had been unjustly enslaved in this country. Specifically, it commemorates June 19th, 1865, when Union Army General Gordon Granger announced in Galveston, Texas, the federal order that all people held as slaves in Texas were free. To me, this day is especially meaningful because it serves as a reminder that the wealth and prosperity of this country was created by the labor of enslaved Black people, who beyond freedom deserve compensation for those centuries of labor, and at the very least, equitable and just treatment in our country today. As a scholar of history and literature, I believe in the power of the historical narratives we tell ourselves, particularly about our national history. Today, we are privileged to have with us Assemblyman Craig Stanley, who will be in conversation with One Montgomery Committee member Jin Patel, who is also a member of the Montgomery Township Board of Education and the Montgomery Middle School PTO co-president. Hi, Jin. Thank you for being here. And hello, Assemblyman Stanley. Thank you for being here.
Hello. You're welcome.
I will next invite Shelley Bell to speak. We have Shelley Bell, who serves as a member of the One Montgomery Committee, as well as the Montgomery Township Planning Board and the Somerset County Commission on the Status of Women, for inviting our honored speaker for today. Shelley, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Mayor, and thank you all so much for joining us. The late Winston Churchill said this: "We make a living by what we get, but we make a life by what we give." Members of the community, it is my honor to introduce Craig A. Stanley, a native of Newark who grew up in the city's public housing. He is a graduate of Harts High School, but completed his senior year of high school in Switzerland as an American Field Service exchange student. Mr. Stanley attended the University of Hartford and earned a bachelor's degree in political science. He was awarded a National Urban Fellowship through which he attained his master's in public administration from Baruch College. For decades, he has served as a servant leader for the YMCA, Youth in Government, Mid-Atlantic YMCA's Board of Trustees, and the YMCA Black Achievers Program, a member of No Child Left Behind Task Force, National Conference of State Legislatures Blue Ribbon Commission of Higher Education, and Immigration Task Force. Craig's introduction into the public sector came when he was tapped to be the assistant to the Speaker Pro Tem of the General Assembly and staffed the Assembly Veterans and Military Affairs. He served on the Committee for New Jersey General Assembly during Desert Storm and Desert Shield. He later then became a legislative policy analyst for the Department of Environmental Protection and Energy and the legislative liaison for the Board of Public Utilities. Craig was elected to the New Jersey General Assembly on November 7th, 1995, to represent the 28th Legislative District in Essex County and served for 12 years before leaving office on January 8th, 2008. During his tenure in the Assembly, Assemblyman Stanley chaired the Assembly Education Committee and co-chaired the Joint Committee on Public Schools, which oversaw the school construction, and education reform implementation. Assemblyman Stanley distinguished himself in the legislature as a strong advocate for education reform. He was also the prime sponsor, which we're going to hear more about, of the law that created the Amistad Commission, which is charged with the development and implementation of an American history curriculum for all grades that is inclusive of African-American contributions. Another key legislative initiative of Assemblyman Stanley's was the New Jersey's anti-predatory lending law, which is one of the toughest and most effective in the nation, and New Jersey's 2005 law to increase the state's minimum wage and establish the Minimum Wage Commission, which ensures timely review and recommendation for adjustments in the wages commensurate with the cost of living. I'm telling you from experience, he has been the recipient of many, many awards and acknowledgments. He has served, and he still serves as an adjunct professor of American government at Essex County College. Also served as the director of the pre-college education in Greater Newark at NJIT in Newark, where he administered pre-college programs and statewide competitions designed to improve outcomes and achievement of students in STEM and leadership. What's near and dear to my heart, he is a member, faithful member of St. James AME Church in Newark, where he serves on the steward board. He also serves as a ministry leader for Social Action Network Ministry at St. James. And I can attest, as my mentor, as my friend, he still continues to be a strong voice for the empowerment and engagement of parents and the implementation of programs that are designed to address the disadvantages of poverty. So it is my privilege to introduce to some and present to others the Honorable Craig Stanley. Thank you for being here with us.
Well, thank you, Shelley. I don't know how to follow that. Maybe I should just leave now. but no, it's let me commend you, Mayor, for having a Juneteenth program. And I really applaud you, and for arranging for me to be part of this program and this discussion. And I also want to thank the One Montgomery Committee and the Montgomery Mosaic for the initiative on this Juneteenth program. This is a very important date, as you said, Mayor, and it's important for a number of reasons, and I'll get to that down a little bit. But first, let me give a shout out to Shelley. She did such a great job on that introduction. It's going to be downhill from here. There's no question. I can't live up to that. But I do want to say that Mayor, you got one. She worked with me for 12 years. She was a key part of my staff. Whether you lived in South Orange or Maplewood or Newark or Irvington, always treated everyone with respect and ensured that people got the services that they needed. And there was a lot of need and different types of need in that legislative district, as you can imagine. South Orange, Maplewood, and Newark and Irvington. So a very, very diverse district. But as I said, so you guys inherited a good one in Montgomery. Our loss is Montgomery's gain, and of course I have to thank her for arranging me to be part of this discussion as well, because obviously that's the connection. Again, I want to thank the folks who brought this about, made this happen, because organizations like this add value to a community. It's very easy not to have these types of discussions because there aren't maybe that many people clamoring for these types of discussions. But it says a lot about you, and it says a lot about your community that you are in fact engaging. And again, these are definitely value adding groups, and I applaud them. And it's not just, the time I talked about how timely this is, this is an important date. But, today we're talking about an issue that that's not a new issue. The issue of racism and discrimination and humiliation, there was a temptation. There was a temptation. So aggravation, humiliation, degradation. But all of those things, have been perpetrated upon people of color for centuries, right? But so that's not new. But what's new is that we're talking about them differently than we ever have before. And what's new is not necessarily the protests, but the fact that the protests are so inclusive of not just African Americans, but Latinos and whites and Asians and people of all walks of life are joining together and saying, this is wrong. So that makes this an epic moment. And as a matter of fact, many have said that this moment that we're in right now is pregnant with opportunity, potential, and momentum. And we mustn't let this moment slip by without insisting upon the institutional changes that are necessary to end the pandemic of the social disease called racism. So I'll leave it there. I have some other things that I'd like to say, but I think we're going to get to them in the conversation. So as I said before, I don't expect to talk for an hour, but let's have a conversation. And thank you so much for inviting me. I'm very happy and honored to be a part of your program.
Thank you for those introductory remarks. And then I'll turn it over to Jin, who will pose some questions, and then we will open it up to questions from the attendees as well.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. As we said, this is going to be a very informal conversation with Assemblyman Craig Stanley. After we've had some conversation, we will open it up for any questions that anyone has for Assemblyman Stanley. To build on what Mayor Sadaf had said, most people are familiar with the Emancipation Proclamation, which was the executive order that President Lincoln issued in September of 1862, declaring that all persons held as slaves shall be free. That executive order went into effect January 1st, 1863. Nearly 2.5 years later, when Union Major General Gordon Granger and his army traveled to Galveston, Texas, is when the last of the slaves were essentially set free. That date, June 19th, 1865, thereafter known as Juneteenth. Today is the 155th anniversary of Juneteenth, the end of slavery, and yet here we are in 2020, still struggling with racism, inequity, and injustice on a daily basis. And yet, most people have never heard of Juneteenth until recently. The movement we see happening this time around is different than many of the past. Changes long overdue are slowly happening. Confederate statues are being taken down. Racial stereotypes are being removed from brands. Notably, Aunt Jemima's being taken off the shelves. Uncle Ben's, Mrs. Butterworth's, Cream of Wheat are all undergoing brand reviews. There have been marches, protests all around the world. There's universal support by people of all cultures and all skin colors. This time feels different. There is no...
I think Jin is frozen.
Can you tell us a little bit about your story and what brought you into a career in public service?
Yeah, that's a good question. How does a boy from the projects get to the state assembly, right? And then as chair of the Assembly Education for 4 years and 2 years chair of the Joint Committee of the Public Schools. Well, it's an interesting story, and I think I would have to give a lot of credit to to my parents and my uncles who were very good examples. As a matter of fact, it was my uncle who's actually the prime sponsor of the Amistad legislation. We were co-primes. There were two co-prime sponsors on the bill, my uncle and myself. William Payne, who was a mentor to me, and his brother Donald Payne, who later became congressman of the first African-American congressman in the state of New Jersey, 10th Congressional District. They were mentors to me. So even though, I grew up in the projects, I was very wealthy with role models and opportunities to do things outside of the projects. And one thing I have to say about Congressman Donald Payne, long before he was a congressman, he had a lot of programs for young people to engage them outside of after school programs. We used to meet down at the YMCA. I was part of a group called Youth in Government. It's a New Jersey model legislature program. I was an assemblyman one year and later became a senator. Didn't have to run. Usually, as you got older, you moved from the assembly to the Senate. But what that did, and there weren't really a lot of people who looked like me in that program, and unfortunately, and I'm somewhat sorry about it, but there still aren't a whole lot of there's still not as much diversity as there should be in that program and those types of programs. But I'm working with people to try to make a difference. Change is slow sometimes, but then you reach an epic moment like we have right now. But it was pretty much Congressman Payne, his brother Bill Payne, that helped give me the type of opportunities. I lived in the projects. I didn't know how poor I was, until after I grew up. We moved from projects from the Little Bricks in Newark. Some people may be familiar with Newark. There were a group of projects called the Little Bricks in the Central Ward of Newark, near Belmont Avenue, and I went to 18th Avenue School, which is about 100 and something years old. And actually, and it's interesting because my first experience with race, Jen, was when I was in kindergarten at 18th Avenue School, and I had a little liking to a little girl in my class, and she was white, and I really didn't, kids are colorblind, she was white, but I didn't really see that. I just had a little, crush, maybe. Kindergartners can have a crush, but she was speaking at the graduation for kindergartners, and some of the people were laughing because she was very good at enunciation, but she was very loud. And so they were kind of giggling a little bit, and I kind of felt bad, and I was getting upset, and I said, stop laughing, stop laughing at her. But anyway, but my sister and her friends saw me, and then later that day, I said, oh, so what's that? Was that your little girlfriend, Craig? Craig has a little white girlfriend. So that was that was like my first introduction to race. And it was funny. It wasn't really harmful. But what was harmful was that later when we moved to an area called Dayton Street, which were more projects, they were just high-rise projects. These were the little bricks. We graduated to the big bricks, and so I thought it was like the Jeffersons moving on up. I got a 7th floor apartment now in the project, 7th floor, not 2nd floor anymore. And it had it oversaw Evergreen Cemetery and Hillside. But what happened one day was we were walking. It bordered Elizabeth, and my best friend and I were walking in Elizabeth, playing a little bit, and this little blind girl said, "Get out of here, you N-words." And I didn't, Jen, I think that might have been the first time I heard the word. And my friend said, oh yeah, you hear what she said? She said, get out of here. And he repeated the word and he said, yeah, that's what we are. And I didn't know what the word meant. I didn't know the history of the word itself because I don't think I'd ever heard the word. But it stuck with me that it wasn't a nice thing to say. But we went, but as I mentioned, I got involved with the youth and government program. I think my first opportunity at activism itself, like a protest, was at Arts High School. And I was a sophomore. Actually, I had just gotten Arts High, probably a sophomore. Yeah, sophomore. And they were and a good buddy of mine who still is a buddy and actually right now he's running for U.S. Senate, Larry Ham, was at Harts High at the time, and he was the student president. And he, got all the students riled up. I kind of thought it was good, substitute teachers. This is great, no work. But he was ahead of his time. He said, this isn't fun. You're not learning. We're supposed to be here to learn. So we went, about 6,000 kids went down to the Gateway Hilton in Newark, New Jersey, and protested the teachers' strike. And the teachers had been out of work, had been out of the classrooms for about 3 or 4 weeks by then at least, and demanded that the teachers and the board go to the bargaining table and resolve the strike because we were losing valuable time. And that was my first act of it. That was my first real act of personal activism. And it made a difference because a couple of days later, the teachers and the board reached an agreement. And I say that to say that young people have a tremendous power that, that a lot of the elders don't necessarily possess. But when young people get involved and engaged, that's something also that you're seeing this time around. Young people are engaged in these protests. As a matter of fact, a friend of mine who lives in Hillsborough, which is, from what I understand, not far from where you guys are, she said that about a couple of weeks ago, there was a demonstration with an ethnically diverse group of high school students with signs out saying Black Lives Matter.
Yep.
I'm overwhelmed at what we're seeing here today from our young people. And so I'll kind of leave it there and let you ask enough.
Yeah.
enough. At this rate, we'll only get about 2 questions, right? Sorry, Jim.
It truly is incredible what the young kids are doing these days. So you were one of the primary sponsors of the Amistad legislation. Can you tell us more about what that is and what prompted you to propose that?
Well, it's a bill that, like right now, we're celebrating Juneteenth, and so we're talking about African American history, and in February, a lot of school districts, they have African American History Month, and they talk about African American history. But the idea behind the Amistad legislation, the Amistad law, is not that African American history is separate. That's not what it's about. It's that African American history is U.S. history. It's the problem is that in many of our curriculums, we don't talk about the contributions of African Americans in the founding and the prosperity of this country, nor do we really treat the institutional racism that was perpetrated upon African Americans either during prior to the Civil War or after the Civil War. And even today, we recently had a Supreme Court decision that struck down pre-clearance, the pre-clearance provision of the Voting Rights Act. So without pre-clearance, we're seeing southern states go back to the old days when you had to jump through hoops to be registered to vote or to vote. So the idea behind the Voting Rights Act was to make it necessary for any changes that southern states had in voter registration laws or voter registration laws primarily and voting laws to go through the United States Department of Justice for review before they could be implemented. Now that that's not the case, we're seeing us going backwards in terms of making sure people have the franchise. But the Amistad law is designed to mandate the inclusion of this curriculum. And, the Amistad Commission has done a very good job of putting together a curriculum for districts to implement. But unfortunately, we haven't seen as many districts as we should or need to implement. But the thing is, and I grew up, it's funny, Jim, I can't get my hair kind of, treated the way I used to. So my age is showing a little, but the fact is, when I was growing up, I would see images of little Shirley Temple, and she was pretty, and I loved her, and God bless her. And she was so smart, but she used to lead around this big black guy who just seemed so, slow. And, that's not the kind of image that's going to help create a good self-image for a young African-American kid. I would see things like Tarzan, going around, swinging on trees and beating up lions and tigers and the natives. Tarzan single-handedly could wipe out a whole tribe. Those types of images. That's very negative imagery, and we see that type of imagery on the news and things like that. But those kinds of things kind of lead to folks feeling that they're not as important or maybe not as smart. One of the things that the Youth and Government program did for me is that it allowed me to compete with people, with my peers of other colors, white peers and so forth. And I said, wow, I had some debates, got a bill passed, and this was the youth legislature when I was a kid. And I said, wow, I can do this. This might be something I might want to do. So if you have the opportunity and the interchange, you develop the confidence. But the problem is that a lot of our images are negative. And unless we have an inclusive, and it's true throughout our history curriculum, and by infusing the Amistad curriculum into the history curriculum, and it's not just history, it's language arts, it's math, it's science. These are all areas where the Amistad curriculum is infused because it tells you about folks who were brilliant scientists, developed the blood plasma and some of the other engineering technology advances of modern day and in the past. So it's important. It's very important. It's not just important for African-American children. It's important for all children because when a child grows up with this kind of false sense of superiority, it's as devastating for the child than if they grow up with the false sense of inferiority. Because what's going to happen when that child loses out to a black child that he's supposed to be superior to? You follow what I'm saying? So yes. This is, but finally, while I would make my uncle proud, he would be proud of this passion. But that's why it's so important. And And I just found out that that the State Department of Education has made it part of the social studies CUSAC review. And so and so that will be very helpful in helping bring about implementation of the act, because up until now there's been no real penalty for not implementing the act. But now, if it's part of CUSAC, it will be that, you know, districts will be penalized if they don't implement.
Yep.
Could you just clarify what CUSAC is for those who might not be familiar?
That's a good question. I kind of forgot what it stood for.
But I mean, what is it? It's some requirement that you have to fill, and if you don't.
Yes, you know, CUSAC has a number of various areas that you have to pass in order for your district to remain, you know, kind of a self-governing district. Because if your district fails CUSAC, that's a warning for the state that they have to come in and take over your district. So yeah, it's a qualitative measurement for districts, and it has various components, including I sponsored the CUSAC bill, by the way. So anybody doesn't like CUSAC, I'm your guy. You can blame me, but yeah, it's and like I said, curriculum is part of it, governance is part of it, your finances, your financials are part of it. Those are all components. But in the curriculum section now, the CUSAC will be included.
That's great to hear. And I just Googled it. So for those who are curious about the acronym, it's New Jersey Quality Single Accountability Continuum. So
yeah, I don't know where they got that from. They could have come up with something a little more jazzier than CUSAC.
So you used two of those words, inclusion and infusion. And when I was reading through the Amistad Commission documents, it's interesting that they said the Amistad legislation is different than what other states have passed, in that rather than portraying blacks as slaves or bystanders, it's more about infusing them into the fabric of U.S. history.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Right. Absolutely. You know, the contributions, you know, over 200, almost 200,000 freed, formerly enslaved persons participated in the Civil War, you know, fought on the side of the North. There were, and again, just a number of different types of contributions on behalf, and it's not considered, like you say, it's not considered Black history, but it's part of U.S. history. That's why infusion. That means it's part of the history and part of the prosperity. You know, when we look at New Jersey, you know, New Jersey became a very wealthy state because it had a lot of its goods were sold to the southern states and made huge amounts of wealth for companies here in New Jersey. As a matter of fact, New Jersey did so well by the southern states that New Jersey would not ratify the 13th Amendment until after several southern states had already ratified it. As a matter of fact, New Jersey didn't ratify the 13th Amendment until it was already ratified by Congress. It was kind of like an afterthought. But just to make the point, yes, enslaved persons not only worked in places of in the South, and it was a matter of free labor and so forth, but they also contributed to the economies of states in the North, who benefited so much from the economy of enslavement.
Some educators believe that the Black history that is currently taught focuses too much on violence and suffering and not enough on the systemic aspects of racism, white supremacy, and the contributions of notable Black Americans and other minority groups. U.S. history is taught such that we are a progressive society, that we've become better and learned from our mistakes over time. We pride ourselves as a country built on liberty and equality, when in fact our past shows that it was built on slavery, segregation, and discrimination. Unfortunately, much of Black history is America at its worst, which is why it's a difficult topic to tackle. So Black history is American history, yet majority of schools across the U.S. still do not teach a complete American history. What is currently taught is generally slavery, segregation, Jim Crow laws, and the civil rights movement. I know there are so many to choose from, but what pivotal moments in U.S. history are currently missing that you feel absolutely should be taught?
Well, I really couldn't give you a pivotal moment. I know you mentioned the civil rights movement of the 1960s, but the civil rights movement wasn't just the 1960s. Remember, Dred Scott, the Dred Scott decision. Dred Scott was, that was an era where people were trying to change the dialogue back then, and that was pre-Civil War, right? So these types of fights have been going on long before the Civil Rights Movement, right? In 1900, the turn of the century in the 1900s, right? W.E.B. Du Bois was one of the founders of the NAACP, which was in response to lynchings in the South, and unfortunately, this. We just had a lynching a few weeks ago with George Floyd. That's what would be defined as a lynching, as well as the young man who was in Atlanta, whose name escapes me right now, who was running and shot down. Wasn't by the police, but it was still a lynching. And most lynchings back then weren't by the police anyway, right? They were by Ku Klux Klan, white supremacist groups that were just racist and intimidating. Their whole reason for being was to intimidate Blacks. And you're right. It's interwoven in the culture of the country. And as I said, it's not just the South. Some people look and say, well, the South was, slavery happened in the South. Oh, enslavement took place in every state of the country. And, that were states during the time that enslavement was going on. Of course, Hawaii and Alaska and some of the last ones come up. Of course, they're excluded. But that's the case. And as a matter of fact, New Jersey was one of the last states to free enslaved persons. It had what was called a gradual emancipation. So it wasn't, the enslavement, when they outlawed enslavement, they didn't automatically free everyone who was enslaved. They allowed for a gradual emancipation of persons as time went on. So, you have to look at the institutions as well. You look at some of the laws of the 1960s right here in New Jersey, where they had redlining. And New Jersey today, you look at New Jersey today, New Jersey is one of the most segregated states in the country. And it's due to redlining and the way folks couldn't get housing in certain areas because banks told people that they couldn't sell their house to people in these areas, or the federal government told banks that they couldn't give loans to people in certain areas. So there is a lot to our current situation, and there is just so much information. When you talk about Du Bois and some of the other folks, these were phenomenal sociologists, but a lot of sociology books don't give any page, don't give a page to Du Bois, when he was one of the first persons to talk about the issues of racism and and segregation and some of the other social issues associated with the treatment of blacks in this country. So yeah, and a number of biologists, medical folks. I'm not a I'm more of a political scientist. I'm more of an American government person, but I will tell you, I'll tell you two things that I think every person has to understand, because when you get beyond the demonstrations, you have to understand how government works. So there are two things we need to know. We all need to know. One is we need to know our history. And as I said, American history and African American history are not separate things. African American history is American history and vice versa. If we don't know it, we are destined to peril and in jeopardy of distinction. Okay, so if African American and American history are one, we are all in this together, right? So and that's kind of like the mantra, right? We're all in this together.
Us together.
So that's one thing. And the other thing is we need to know how people have to know how government operates. Our young people, they have to understand that you can't just march, but you have to march, you have to register to vote, you have to hold elected officials accountable, you have to hold school boards accountable. Okay? Look, the doggone thing should have been implemented. You know, it should have been implemented without being part of CUSAC, period. Right? It's the law. It should have been implemented. You go to your board meeting and you say you demand it, right? And if the people don't do it, you vote them out and you put people in who will do it, right? But that's part of American government. A lot of people don't understand that. A lot of people will march, but then when it comes time to vote, they say, well, I don't want to vote. Now, I think people are starting to realize, and young people, everyone is starting to realize that it's not just a matter of marching, or it's not just a matter of being upset. It's a matter of voting, holding elected officials accountable, and it's not a sprint. It's not. I used to be a sprinter in high school. I used to run the 100 and the 220 and hate the 440, right? Today I run marathons because I don't have that speed anymore. So, but I run to stay in shape now. But this whole movement here, and one of the things that people are kind of concerned about is that, you know, folks will get tired and they'll stop, and then, you know, things will start going back to normal, and then the elected officials think, oh, we don't have to do anything. No, you have to continue to protest, but you also have to vote. You also have to fill out your census and return your census, because that's another area of empowerment, right? And when the first census was taken, you know, they counted enslaved persons in the first census. Did you know that, Jen? They counted African American persons in the first census, but they only counted them as 3/5. Some people are familiar with the phrase, the 3/5 compromise. Well, it was a compromise between the North and the South. So the enslaved persons, I try to stay away from the word slave, because the way the system was done, it was they tried to dehumanize, you know, this whole concept, this whole industry. You know, they weren't slaves, they were human beings. They were human beings that were enslaved. When you looked at it like that, hopefully it caused you to have some empathy, right? And say, maybe this shouldn't be happening. But when you call them something else, when you call them property or you call them slaves, then it comes different. But 3/5, the first census, 3/5. So we were at 60% in the first census. Today, in some towns, well, North Irvington, East Orange, and Orange, to name them, but in other communities of color, the numbers are below 50%. So it's all part of empowerment. It's all part of government. It's all part of changing the institutions that don't provide the implementation, because it's not even just the people that you elect. Like people talk about the president, right? Everybody goes out and votes for the president, but then you have to vote for Congress, right? You have to vote for senators. You have to vote for everybody down the line, down to the mayor, right? And I shouldn't say down to the mayor. Most people vote for the mayor. The mayor is something everybody votes for. Then when it comes to council or committee people, people say, I don't know that much about them. But mostly everybody votes for the mayor. But you have to vote for everybody down the line, the council people, everybody, because they all play a role in making these types of changes. And as we have seen, this bill, I had to look it up to see when we passed it. Do you have the date we passed it? We passed this bill on August 28th, 2002. August 28th is the date of the March on Washington. That was the date that Martin Luther King went to Washington. So that might have had some significance there. But it's been almost 20 years, right? And it has been implemented. So what I'm saying, it's not just, so we have to be vigilant in terms of making sure our young people and everybody understands how government operates and how we change these things, because you can't make the systemic and institutional changes without the right people in office, or with, and without voting or the threat of being voted out of office. You can have, and then I'll stop. Lord have mercy, getting close. But let me just say, because you can have people in office who want to do the right thing or would do the right thing if they get the pressure. That's what's happening now with these demonstrations. That's why it's important to keep them up, because people who want to do the right thing, now they feel that they have this moment where they can get it done. And the same with Amistad. I think now is the time for people to impress upon their boards of education that this is important. It's not, like I said, it's not important just to African Americans. It's important to everybody, to every child, to have that type of education.
Okay. So we have some questions from some of our attendees. Zachary asks, thank you so much for speaking with us, Assemblyman. I am a high school social studies teacher in a nearby town. What advice do you have for those who are committed to ending racial injustice through education?
Well, one piece of advice I have for you is to teach the Amistad, curriculum. And there are places that you can get, and I'm going to send an email to I'll send it to Jen, and if you can put your email address in I guess there's a chat room, right? Mm-hmm. Put your email address in the chat room if you can. You can actually send it directly to Jen, and not have everybody else see it. But you can send your email address to Jen, and he can forward you any information that I send. But teaching the curriculum, that's one of the biggest things that you can do, is teach the curriculum and teach American government. You're right. You're in the driver's seat. You're right where we need you to be, and that's and that would do much toward ending these racial injustices and disparities, because by educating your young people, you're educating them for change.
Another question from Paul. When teaching and talking about history, is it more important to focus on the many positive contributions of the Black community, being inclusive, or naming the injustices perpetrated on African Americans, perhaps creating separation? It occurs to me that it is difficult to find the right balance between those two important American stories.
That is a fantastic question. I wish Dr. Lily Edwards was here with me to help you out with that. But yeah, there are resources, because that's a great question, and resources are there that will help you navigate that balance, and give you the content as well as the way that these things can be delivered, so that so it's a constructive discussion. And I understand exactly what you're saying, but that's what the commission is there for. And I'm going to yes, I'm going to share the information. A consultant, I don't know the person, But Dr. Lily Edwards recommended the person. She's he or she, and I don't remember the exact name, but I have it here, and I'll forward it to you. They can help you with implementation of the curriculum, how to, as well as the curriculum content.
What we can do is after the webinar, we can consolidate a list of resources, and everybody who's attended this webinar, we can send it to everybody. So everybody.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I'll just, let me just say, because I know you're probably wrapping up, we're probably running out of time and it's almost over, but I think I have 5 things that districts, 5 model indicators, 5 model school and district indicators for implementation of Amistad. One is, of course, the school board resolution on adoption and implementation of an inclusive curriculum. This is a school board resolution, right? The subject area supervisor and or principal review of teacher lesson plans for consistent inclusion of African Americans. Number 3, ongoing professional development and training and workshops for teachers and administrators, sponsored by the school, the Amistad Commission, or other agencies and organizations. Review and revise curriculum, and schools would fulfill NJ Cusack Amistad criteria. Those were the 5 model school district indicators that were given to me by Dr. Lily Edwards. She served on the commission and chaired the commission, the Amistad Commission, for a number of years. She just recently came off the commission, but she has she was nice enough to share. We've had a relationship over the years. She's spoken at my Essex County College American Government class, because I think it's important that folks that the students get that. Get as much information that they can, because they if you graduated, if you're in my American government class at Essex County College, chances are you haven't received much of that. So you have to, so we have to make sure that we push to get these changes made. And I will send you information on who you can go to, where, some resources that are available.
Great. There's 2 other questions I definitely want to get to before we have to wrap up. This question is from Dawn. It is fabulously important to incorporate Black history and cultural contributions into the U.S. history and English curriculum in our schools. But I also want to talk about how to bootstrap some education about Black history for adults in our community. Do you have any recommendations about how to get some exposure for people who aren't in school? What kind of forums can we support to get that message of Black contributions to America out to a broader audience than just folks who are already sympathetic?
Well, you get that social studies teacher to just ask the question, and you get them to do a presentation for the community. Let them do presentations for PTA, or I'm not picking on him, but get our educators to do these presentations. Do them. And let the board even sponsor them, right? Let the board and sponsor these things, and give the teachers credit for doing them if they do them. And have it, so you have PTA meetings, you have board meetings, you may have special board meetings that you will do, things like that. And you don't have to just do it once a month or once a year, in February. Let's try to do it often. That was the whole idea behind Amistad in the first place. We try to cram centuries, millenniums of African American history into a month. But let's do things like that ongoing. And I think that's an excellent question, by the way. And I think it's an excellent answer, if I must say so myself.
So for those of you who are on the Wednesday special Board of Ed meeting, There was a suggestion brought up by community member Will Rogers regarding study circles, which is a great idea. There are plans to implement that, so the community should be hearing about that going forward, and that will be inclusive of students as well as adults. So that'll be a great way forward. Let's take one last question from Patrick. Has the commission received any resistance from any school districts in incorporating African American history?
Well, I talk to folks. I've experienced resistance on the job. It's called they're called microaggressions. Right? People aren't going to out now say, look, we're not going to include. We ain't including the Black history. Get that stuff out. No, they're not going to say that, but they just won't do it. So if you see a district that's not doing it, that's like a microaggression, right? You're at work and you're the supervisor. You tell somebody to do something, and they don't tell you they're not going to do it. They just don't do it, right? Yes. And so that's what we have. So we have seen some resistance, obviously, but I think that making it part of CUSAC helps to eliminate some of that.
All right. Thank you for your time, Assemblyman. Mayor, do you want to?
Yes. So I know that Jin has to jump off to our high school's graduation. So I will thank him for moderating the discussion.
Thank you, Jin.
And thank you so much to Assemblyman Stanley for joining us. Thank you for everyone who joined on the call. I think I will stay on, and if people want to stay on and just continue the conversation a little bit, for those of us who can stay on, maybe we can do that. But I did want to say that if you want to continue these types of conversations, Montgomery Mosaic has a Facebook group that you can join and find invitations. And then if you want to, we're still developing the township mailing list, but you can just email me. My email address is sjaffer, Jaffer, at twp.montgomery.nj.us. And I'll send that out to everyone who's registered and attended today as well. So thank you to everyone who is joining us and needs to jump off the call. Thank you to our honored guests and speakers. And I'll stay on for just some conversation, maybe going over some of the questions if I can give some information regarding them. So have a good evening, everyone. And thank you so much. It's just such a valuable discussion, and we really gained. 1 hour wasn't enough, so we might be calling you again.
Not a problem.
All right. Okay, great. Thank you. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Bye.
You too. You're welcome. Thank you.
Good night.
Appreciate the invite.
So there was a question about whether, so this is from Deidre, fear and misunderstanding are the root of all community problems. In my opinion, and education is a weapon to defeat fear, but also misunderstanding. If there's any plan to bring programs to teach the curriculum to communities, like through the library system, I would even love to hear about some community events developed for police departments around the country. So I just want to speak a little bit to that. I haven't spoken to our library commission about it, but I think that that's actually a group that we should bring in. One of the things that I've been talking to some community members about is doing a community forum on how to combat racism, specifically anti-Black racism. I know that we had our Montgomery Speaks Out Against Racism event a week and a half ago or a couple weeks ago now. And the school board had their meeting last night, which was very intense, or on Wednesday night, which was very intense. And there's a lot of trauma that people have experienced, and we need to get those stories out. We need to find out where the problems are and address them. And the library is a great suggestion of an organization to bring in when we do a collaborative forum. And that is a resource that goes to all ages, right? That's not just for children who are in school. So thank you so much for that discussion. I'm definitely noting it down that we should be including our library system in these conversations and reaching out to the library board. And I encourage all of you to do that as well. Contact the library board and say that as, members of this community, you think it's very important that they do programming about issues of race and racism and Black history for the community at large. So thank you for that suggestion. In terms of police departments, we have been having some conversations for members of the Black community, specifically with our police department. So that's more of a work session or a smaller group thing. But I think in terms of police department training, that's also something that we're currently doing research into. You know, what types of implicit bias training are out there? What is the training like in general overall? But I think that this is something that kind of needs to change at probably the state level. And I know that the Attorney General's office is really working on different initiatives, but they are the ones who authorize the police academy training programs. And so another thing that, you know, I plan to advocate for, and I think that, you know, anybody who feels passionately about this ought to, is, you know, contact the Attorney General's office and ask these questions. And I will certainly do that as well. Say that we want to know what type of ongoing training is happening for police departments. And, you know, as mayor of the township, you know, I have a responsibility for the police department, but also for the entire municipal staff. And I think that it's important for all public employees, whether they are municipal staff, police departments, educators in our public schools, that they all are getting this training, this education. It's really a whole society problem. You know, we cannot address it in only one place or another place. Although, you know, wherever we are, we can try to make the impact that is possible. I don't know, someone had asked about whether private schools also have to abide by Amistad. I don't know, Shelley, if you...
Well, when Assemblyman Stanley was in office, yes, and as chair of the education, it was supposed to be implemented across the board, regardless of whatever private, non-private, whatever institutions that were in the state of New Jersey, they were supposed to adhere to that legislation.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Shelley.
Mm-hmm.
And then there was another question that said, after reforming our education system, what's the next step in undoing systemic racism in New Jersey? And I think that's a $1 million question, or that's the question that we would all need to have. But I think I would say that the way to think about it is not that there is a one step at a time or one thing at a time. It's that we have to approach it from all angles. We have to approach it in the school boards. We have to approach it in how we communicate with our community in terms of our police departments and our municipal staff. And, you know, one of the things that's come out for me in these discussions that we've had with our police department is that people don't necessarily even know what the process is to express a grievance or to say that you're not comfortable. And it was kind of a revelation for people that you can submit an anonymous complaint and say, you know, I had a bad experience with X officer. You could just send an anonymous email or a phone call saying that, and that an investigation will be done if you don't feel comfortable. But that you definitely should feel comfortable that there is an internal affairs process if anybody ever feels uncomfortable, and that's not, or that they were targeted, and that's absolutely unacceptable to us. So I think we have to take a whole society approach that, you know, those of us who have an impact in education work there. Those of us who want to look at policing practices work there. Those of us who want to do programs to the library work there. It can seem very overwhelming. And I know the advice that certain organizers have given me is that, you know, pick two causes, pick two organizations that you can work with or two initiatives, and dedicate yourself to those. I think all of us are feeling very passionate right now, as we should, because we've been forced to face this really pernicious and horrible issue that has stayed in our country. And we want to do something, and we should do something. But I would say a practical approach to it is maybe pick one or two focuses that you're going to have. And that's the way to move forward, but that we all have a role to play. And I think that is all of the questions. So I will wrap this program up then, and thank all of you for joining us. And thank you to Shelley for bringing our honorable guest here to join us for this talk, and that we will continue this conversation. We will continue these initiatives, and we have to. It's a moral obligation, but I do feel hopeful that there is more recognition even of the holiday of Juneteenth and the significance of that in American history. So let's keep working for the good and be inspired by the work of people like Assemblyman Stanley, who really has made an impact. And now that there's a renewed interest in the work that he did, you know, he laid the groundwork at that time, but it wasn't, I guess, there weren't repercussions if you didn't implement it. And now there are going to be. So we are seeing progress. So I will wrap it up with that. I don't know, Shelley, if you have any final thoughts.
No, I think it was a great conversation.
Yes.
I'm just glad that we had the participants. Unfortunately, we were not able to see who joined us, but we are all in this together. And my hope is that the superintendent, I'm hoping that the superintendent was on the call.
Yes, she was.
Some
Well,
other board of
there were some
trustees,
members, yeah.
board members and other trustees. This is a community effort and it takes all of us. We're all in this together. So thank you so much.
Good night, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.